Hi, today we have Aaron Fawcett speaking to us. He was an OCC alumni and goes to UCI. He's applying to a PhD programs in fall of 2025. Aaron Fawcett, do you want to get
Yeah,
started?
I'm here. So give me a little bit of direction. Do you want me to give you some background um, on how I got here? How would you like me to structure this?
Yeah, I think that would be a good starting place, like, you can't kind of like your journey to start off with, and how you got where you are and what you're doing
Great.
now.
Okay, and you can hear me all right?
Yeah, perfect.
Great. Okay, I was a returning student. I didn't really do a lot. When I came out of high school, I joined the Marine Corps. I served in the Marine Corps and had a family and got into the business world and just found that that was really mundane over time. And so I used some of those veterans benefits to go back to school. And I came to OCC and I dabbled in a few classes. I wasn't really sure on the direction I wanted to take until I took one of Dr. Ferguson's classes. Specifically, it was a biopsychology class. And so it kind of linked together. Obviously, I'm sure you've taken them, but the scientific aspects of what's going on, figuratively speaking, under the hood in the mind or in the brain, um, and matching that to behavior. And so that really got me interested. And then I started taking some math and science classes and more psychology classes, and eventually applied to transfer. I applied to Berkeley, Fullerton, Davis, UCI, and UCLA, and I got accepted, and I ended up going to UCI because it was close. It was closer to home, and I thought it was a better fit for me. Um, Now, there's something I will tell you, and maybe this will come up more in the Q&A, but I think this is really important, was I had no real idea how broad and vast the world of psychology was. In my mind's eye, it was something where you go into a psychology program, which leads you to being a therapist or a clinical psychologist of some sort, and I really didn't know much beyond that. Um, it wasn't until Dr. Ferguson invited me to get involved in research when I took experimental methods that gave me at least some idea that I wanted to be interested. So let me back up a little bit. That's why I ended up at UCI, was because the UCs are generally research institutions. So when I came here, I transferred as a psychological science major, which quite honestly didn't have a lot of science in it. It was pretty much geared towards getting like being a therapist, but they also have a cognitive science and psychology Bachelor of Science program over here in the School of Social Sciences. So I switched. I transferred into that major after into the psychology Bachelor of Science after my first quarter here, and I enjoyed a lot more. I tended to gravitate more towards individual differences, cognitive control, a lot of these things that are described more through implicit processes in the brain. And so if stats, math, you do more programming and get involved in that sort of stuff. And I've really enjoyed it. I've been in Dr. Router's lab over here for about a year, and I also work in a visual perception lab. And actually, it's under review right now, but I published or submitted my first paper as the first author for publication. So pretty phenomenal, really, going from community college. I didn't know that any of that would be possible for me. I felt getting involved there gave me a lot more confidence to get into labs and get involved in research when I got here. So yeah, the coursework, quite honestly, some of it I felt like at Orange Coast College, especially the math and science courses, were much more rigorous than they are here. So I felt very prepared. So if you're, I think you'll find that when you transfer, that it won't be as much of a shock. I think the biggest shock for me was going from the semester to the quarter system, which you adjust to, but it's kind of fast and furious. It comes at you in, 10, 11 weeks as opposed to 15 or 16. So currently still researching, coming up with another paradigm that we're working on right now. It's another visual perception task that looks at how if neural networks can predict your errors, which I won't go into too great a depth on. But yeah, I'm a fourth year, so I'll be graduating in the spring. and I've applied to cognitive science programs here in California to do graduate school. So that's pretty much my story, and I'll leave it there, and I'll kind of open it up for questions. I didn't want to cover too much that maybe you're not interested in or that wouldn't be helpful.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about your research, like how did you find the labs, you know, because you got into research very quickly at UCI and.
Yes.
And it's.
Okay. So my advice to any of you that are interested in research, if you're getting ready to transfer, is in the summer before you actually step into your first classes, is I encourage you to go on the faculty website at whatever school you're going to go to. Find out what labs, look at the lab website for the professor, look at some of the professor's work, look at the research. You can do this on PubMed or Google Scholar and see what interests you. And if you're really interested, then you send them an email, and the structure that I found works best is me, you, us, meaning I do an intro paragraph that says, hi, my name is Aaron Fawcett. I'm a transfer student coming to this school. And then you write a paragraph about them to demonstrate that you've read some of the work, you understand what goes on in their lab. And that final paragraph, which is us, is saying, here's what I think we could do together. And I found that to be a very effective method to get interviews for labs.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the types of things you're doing in the labs, the type of research you're doing?
Yes. So every lab is different, and that's why I said it's pretty good to look at what kind of work they're doing in there. The first lab I got into was the Behavior, Emotions, and Affective Neuroscience lab that was in the School of Psychological Science. Now, the structure in this lab, it was very organized in the sense that undergraduates were required to go to the lab 10 hours a week. You performed tasks like you get certifications to run human subjects, you learn how to run human subjects, but there was a great deal of distance between the undergraduates and the researchers and the PI being the principal investigator who runs the lab. So this lab was great from the standpoint of if you're starting out, it helps you with learning how to run human subjects, but there wasn't a lot of possibility for me to engage in an undergraduate research proposal or original research. So I ended up changing, and then I moved over to where I am now, which is the Structure and Perception and Cognition lab and the Vision lab here, which was much more collaborative. The expectations were higher in terms of you're expected to learn more things and kind of learn from the graduate students and keep up on some concepts that they really don't cover in your undergrad. But if you want to produce research, I think those are better labs to be in. They're a little less structured. You'll have to do more in terms of like finding participants for your research, and that's not all handled by people in like management or administrative roles like in the other lab I was in. So my point there is that labs differ. It's good to have conversations with the principal investigator or the graduate students to understand what's expected of you. They'll generally tell you that up front and figure out which fit is best for you. Was that helpful?
Yeah. No, I have some other things I was going to keep you on. Other questions.
Sure. Now,
go ahead.
To the students that are there, can any of you maybe tell me where you're thinking of transferring or some things that you might be concerned about or unsure of with respect to the major or UCI in general, if you're thinking of coming here as a psychology major or getting into labs and what that looks like?
Well, I'm thinking of transferring to UCI as well, like maybe, but for when you apply to go to labs or like you're interested in doing the labs, do you find ones that are related to what you want to do with your degree, or do you just like find ones that are available? Like, are you forced to do something you, or not forced, but pressured into doing a lab you don't like, or?
Sure. Well, nobody's going to pressure you to be in a lab. Most people, I think a lot of students go into it from the standpoint of thinking, okay, I don't really care. I just want a letter of recommendation for when I transfer to my master's or graduate program. And I've seen some students who approach it that way. And the first lab that I was in, that might be a good fit for somebody with that mindset, because you just show up, you kind of do your job. You're not challenged too much, and it's not too rigorous. But if you're really interested in research, I would highly recommend that you find somebody. You're going to find that no lab matches your interests 100%, but you can find ones that are closer, that at least have topics or methods that you're interested in, because you'll get bored and you won't want to do it if the research questions are just you have no interest in them.
Thank you. Yeah, so like when I was an undergraduate, I thought I was interested in being a clinical psychologist and doing like with children. So I did developmental research. And I found that I didn't really enjoy it. And so that's why I ended up doing my master's and kind of figuring out what I wanted to do because it was too subjective for me. I was more like, I think like Aaron's first lab where I was kind of like a little, like doing the busy work type of stuff, and not really getting to think about the bigger challenges. So it was kind of a means to a letter of recommendation and saying I did some research and so I would obviously went a very different route as I went on for a master's and my PhD.
And I will say, just to kind of come back to the question that I was asked earlier, is I have found that as you go through this educational process, right, there's these classes you have to take because your advisor says you need to take them or you need a certain number of credits to graduate. But working in the lab and on research has actually taught me more than I've probably learned in a lot of the classes here. Now, the classes give you like background information and structure that you need, but a lot of the real like granular learning or some of the questions that you might be afraid to ask in class get answered in a lab setting.
You talk about some of the classes that you're taking. I think you mentioned that you were taking some sort of fMRI class or something like that.
Yeah, so as I had mentioned here at UCI, they bifurcate the two majors where you have the psychological science, and those folks like Dr. Ferguson talked about, they're more clinical or developmental. So you take a lot of truly pure psychology classes. You're going to be writing some papers, but you wouldn't take fMRI courses or research-oriented courses. You would do that more in the Bachelor of Science. So one thing that you have over here is you'll use something called R, where you learn statistical analysis and how to do that with like a computational. R is kind of like a programming language for statistics, and you get to learn to use that. Currently, yes, I'm in an fMRI research lab, which has been really fun. You get to learn the pre-processing. We look at the data. We have something called Brain Voyager that we work through. And so we're actually getting this data and we're working with the raw data and we're learning how to process it in such a way as to where you can actually, trying to think of how to frame this. Where like, I'll give you an example. Right now I'm looking at theory of mind and the temporal parietal junction. I'm sure some of you have heard about that, maybe false belief tasks and inferring what is in the mind of other people. And so we're using this data to actually look at, you can see what baseline is versus an experimental task and where there's activity in the brain or a bold response relative to baseline. So that class has been rigorous, but a lot of fun. So over here, there's definitely a lot of neuroimaging labs that you can get into, whether it be EEG or fMRI or transcranial magnetic stimulation. That's not a neuroimaging technique, but there are things like that.
How competitive was it to get into the lab you're in now compared to the lab you were first doing?
How competitive? I think the first lab honestly was more competitive in terms of there were more applicants because more people were interested in this. It seemed to me were interested in the structure of just, I kind of want to show up and do my hours. So there were more applicants there. This one was really a smaller lab in terms of the professor just said, hey, can you meet me in the lobby of the building at this time, and we just sat and we walked and got coffee and we talked. And he was like, "Okay, this will work. Like you'll work." So I would say that it depends on the lab. Now there's a couple of labs here. One called the YASA lab, and one called the Stark lab, and those I think are more biopsychology oriented, or they're towards the medical side, but those are highly competitive labs. And so I didn't answer your question, but it varies based on the lab that you're trying to get into and how the professor uh, treats that process, which just seems to differ from lab to lab.
Questions. So what were the preparation you did to transfer to UCI? Like what other like extracurricular or PIQ?
Sorry, I didn't catch the first part.
What were the preparation you did to transfer to UCI, like in extracurricular wise and like PRQ questions?
Okay. Yeah. I think I was just authentic, with the PIQs. It's good to have somebody help you review those. You might, if you have a good relationship and you're going to office hours with like an English professor you might have, or a professor that you think uh, is willing to help you in that process, that's always helpful to maybe have them do some proofreading. But I would encourage you to just be honest. I had kind of a leveling of my pride when I got here, and I started attempting to write a literature review for one of the labs that I'm currently in. And my professor told me point blank, he said, listen, nobody cares how smart you are. And if we drop this paper in the middle of Aldrich Park, which is the park we have here, would you want to read it? Which he was basically saying, you don't have to try and write in such a way that's not authentic, or trying to show people that you're smart enough or capable enough. If you're at Orange Coast College and you're getting grades and good grades and you're doing all your stuff, you're more than competitive. So just I would encourage you to trust yourself, be authentic, and let your true voice come through, because I think that'll be more compelling than trying to write what you think they want to see to show that you're bright and capable.
What about extracurricular?
Extracurriculars.
Extracurriculars. I really haven't done much in that way. They have a ton of clubs here and a lot of different stuff. I didn't get involved in much of that. I think some of that's unique because I had prior work experience. So I didn't really need that. So I focused pretty much solely on working in labs. And then also, you can be a learning assistant for professors. You can be a reader grader, and they pay you to do that as well.
Do you think, participating in the research symposium, like, helped you be a better candidate for the labs, or prepare you at all for the labs you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only did it prepare me for the make me a better candidate for the labs, because I could say on my resume or CV that I had this experience and that I had presented had done a poster presentation. That actually carried a lot of weight. The professors were really impressed by that, because it shows that, I think there was an earlier question about being competitive, and that makes you much more competitive because it's it makes you stand apart from the other students. It shows that you have the initiative and the willingness to do something research oriented that most of the other students aren't doing, especially if you're a transfer. It just, yes, it makes a lot of difference.
Now, if you're gonna go the comp sci route or the psychological science, or not the psychological science, but the PS route, and end up doing a lot of art, is there anything that students should do to prepare themselves for that before they get to Irvine, or will they get prepared there?
Yes. What I would encourage you to do is, as you go through the process of looking at majors, is kind of be honest with yourself about what you want to do. And I say that because I found there's students here who will go into, say, the Bachelor of Science program or the cognitive science route because they think this Bachelor of Science looks better in some way. And then they just really don't like the classes. So if you're not interested in, mathematics or physics or biology or statistics, if these things don't interest you, I would encourage you, and you really have a clear sense of you're more interested in like development or clinical psychology, you might go the psychological science route. But if you are interested in the bachelor science route or doing more of this like computational or quantitative research, I would encourage you to take a course in Python. I think you have to take statistics to transfer. You might consider calculus or linear algebra. Those would be really good. But at least some basic programming. I would say take one, not that you'll end up being a computer scientist or anything like that, but I came here with no programming experience, and I wish I had had at least one or two classes that would have familiarized me with it a little more.
Yes, you're the second person that we've had this semester that has made that comment about the coding.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she's also, she hasn't gotten to graduate school yet, but she's interested in research and, so that was kind of her comment too, was learn to code.
Yes. And I would say don't let it scare you. They have like I took a scientific Python course, and when you get to UCI, you'll take a what's called a 10 series. You'll learn data analysis or exploratory data analysis using R, which is really nice, and it'll piggyback nicely on what you've learned in statistics, like doing ANOVAs or a Tukey post hoc test, or these different things that you'll use. R is a powerful tool. You just have to understand a little bit about coding to use that to its full potential.
Want to talk a little bit about how you made your choices for graduate school?
Well, yeah.
The process itself.
What was the last part? I'm sorry.
And just the application process itself.
Okay, sure. I found out that PhD programs that are through UC, a lot of the schools are fully funded. And not only that, they pay you. So it was really I had an assumption in my mind that graduate school was, I'm going to have to take on student loan debt or find some other way to fund this. But that is not true with PhDs. So originally I was considering a master's, but being involved in the lab, being around graduate students, I learned a lot of information about grad schools. So for me, I used the same process that I used to get into the labs. Was I took the summer to look at professors' websites, their labs, their research. I even looked at some of their graduate students and the type of work they were doing in there, and used that as the basis to reach out to professors individually, which I would strongly encourage you to do. And then basically, if the professor said, hey, this looks good, I think you'd be a good fit for the lab, I strongly encourage you to apply. Those are the programs that I applied to. If the professor seemed ambivalent or didn't respond after 3 attempts, I just moved on. So I only reached out to the programs that I knew would be a good fit for me, and there was an opportunity, and I did it that way. And yeah, just finished that process, and Dr. Ferguson was kind enough to write a letter of recommendation for me, and I'm getting the same thing from the professors whose labs I work in. So that was really the direction I went. And I applied to Stanford, to UCLA, to UC San Diego, UC Davis, and UCI. So I didn't cast a very large net, and I wanted to stay in. Oh, and I also, here's another thing this might be helpful. I actually got accepted to a lab in Switzerland and one in Germany. But the challenge with going to programs in Europe is they don't fund you unless you have a master's program, or a master's degree. So if you want to go study abroad, at least in Europe, you got to have a master's degree to do that. And I learned that just kind of going through the process.
When you apply to labs, do you have to apply with labs? Sorry, do you have to apply to labs with professors you have, or are these like just any professors that you find?
It's really up to you. I find so for me, the lab I like the most that I'm in, I've never had Dr. Router as a professor. So I just liked the work that was going on in his lab and reached out to him. So I have like one lab I have had that professor have been in one of their courses, but this one, no. So the short answer is no. It's up to you who you want to work with, and you reach out to them and do it that way. But I think a lot of people will go to labs because they're comfortable and they go to office hours and talk to that professor and then look for the opportunity. But being a transfer student, I would strongly encourage you to just start reaching out to those professors whose classes you've never taken and you've never been on campus and you're not even there yet, to get your foot in the door. Because like I'm shocked that I'm graduating soon. It just goes by so much faster than you think it will. And if you start applying once you get here after your first quarter, you're going to find that you may not have enough time to do what you want in these labs before graduate school.
For your funding for the PhD, did you mention like your PhD funded your graduate school, or how does that work?
So schools differ, but this has been my experience thus far. So say you wanted to come to UCI as a graduate student in cognitive science, you would apply and your program would be fully funded, meaning that your program is paid, your coursework and everything is paid through grants. And they generally pay you some stipend. I don't know how much that is. It's not a huge sum of money, but they basically, you get some sort of living expenses. I think they offer you health care and the opportunities to teach as a TA to make some additional income. But yeah, it's not like at Orange Coast College or when you transfer and you do your undergrad and you're using either a scholarship or like financial aid. It's paid for. If you're accepted, they make you an offer and it's paid for.
So would you say like having a PhD highly guarantees you won't have to go like severely into debt for graduate school?
I can't really speak to that in terms of, I mean, that would be on a, we would be doing like a cost benefit analysis, right? But you wouldn't incur student loan debt per se, depending on the program, if it's fully funded. You might have to, if you can live off of the income that they give you. But no, it wouldn't be like, say, medical school where it costs you, $250,000, $300,000, just throwing out a number to attend, right? Like your coursework and your time doing your PhD, that's paid through a grant. You don't pay for that.
Yeah, so the fully funded PhD programs, they make sure that there's somebody, there is a PI there that wants you to work with them, basically. There's someone that's there that's willing to take you on their lab, and either they have money to pay you a stipend out of, and it's not like, it's not paying out of their own pockets. They have grants that pay you, and they have it worked in so that like, I'm gonna have, I need 4 graduate students and I need 4 postdocs to get this research done. And so that's how NIH determines how much money they're gonna, that they get basically. And then they have to disperse that money and use it accordingly. And then there are programs that aren't fully funded, so you do have to be careful. They're far and few between, I think, but you do have to be careful, make sure that you're not going to a program that's not fully funded. Because we had a guest speaker a couple of years ago that did that. A lot of debt.
Yep. So plenty of access to programs here in California and abroad or in other parts of the country that are fully funded. Great programs, and you're really selling yourself. And that's why if you're if you're at community college now and you're getting involved in research and you do the research symposium, which I would highly encourage you to do, this puts you in a great position to get into labs and start researching once you transfer. And I haven't been accepted yet, but I think it makes you a much more competitive candidate if you have this experience than somebody who doesn't. In fact, I know that's true.
Oh, would you say like there's like a big difference between research opportunities you get being Psych BS versus Psych BA, like psychology sciences versus psychology of science?
I would say it depends on what you want to do. And if I could, as simple as possible is if you knew with relative certainty that you wanted to be a clinical social worker or a clinical psychologist, then I would say the psychological science program is the best program because you're going to start moving towards getting clinical research hours. I think as an undergrad, you get like 80 of them or something. Um, so if that's the path, if you're much more interested in, like you scored high on a personality test for a humanitarian and you really want to help people and be working in a clinical role, the psychological science program or a psych bachelor of arts is probably a good path for you. If you're much more interested in cognitive psychology or some research focus that's much more quantitative, you really want to go the Bachelor of Science route because you just won't have the tools to be competitive in that setting, and you'll lack the statistical knowledge and things like that. So that would be that's this of course is just completely my opinion. I'm not an authority on this, but that's what I would say should kind of guide you when you're thinking about a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science, because I'll be honest, nobody in the transfer, like as I was transferring, nobody really had answers for me. But I would say it's your coursework, right? Like, what are you really going to use? And if you need programming, mathematics, and science and stats and whatnot, the Bachelor of Science is a better route to go.
Would you say like majoring in Bachelor of Science versus Bachelors of Arts would like inhibit your chances of getting such like either or research program? Like say if you're like a BA, but you want to try a research lab in like BS, will that hinder you in any way?
No, I think personally, oh my gosh, if I could go back and do it again, I would probably get I would have like studied physics or engineering along with psychology, because I'm much more interested in math psych and quantitative psych at this point. But I would say that if you're taking a Bachelor of Arts, you're not going to have a poverty of psychology courses. I just think it gives you the opportunity to take more math and science courses. But there is kind of a silver lining with the Bachelor of Science program here, is they give you you can take these really fun biopsych courses, which are not too rigorous in terms of biology, but they talk more about the biological underpinnings of behavior and so on. So it doesn't mean that because you're in the Bachelor of Science, you have to take all these really, really hard courses. But to answer your question in its simplest way is I don't think one or the other would hinder you in terms of being a therapist or social worker at all. But I think the opposite, the inverse is true, that if you didn't have the more rigorous the STEM courses, you would have a harder time in like a quantitative or computational psychology program. I hope that answers your question. I know it was kind of all over the place.
Thank you.
Is there any program that help like undergrad students familiar with working with people and clinical experience and not a research one?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Is it,
Just repeat it, I didn't catch.
is there any program that help undergrad students familiar with working with people and clinical experiences and not the research lab?
Oh yeah. I think that's, and Dr. Ferguson might have different input on this, but like, say for example, you go to Cal State Fullerton or Cal State Long Beach. The Cal States don't have, it's not as research focused. So you might take a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and they might have some opportunities for clinical hours. I know that here in the psychological science program, they're more geared in that direction. So they would have resources and support for you to that would support you on that path. But more of your clinical hours would probably come during your master's program when you do your practicum over there in like an LMFT or a MSW, a Master's in Clinical Social Work program.
So I'm curious as to what's your number one pick for graduate school?
My number one pick?
Now, where do you want to go?
Well, I like Dr. Router here. We deal with Bayesian hierarchical methods or mental models using Bayesian statistics. But Dr. Gardner's lab, Dr. Gardner at Stanford, or Dr. Phil Kellerman, those at UCLA, those two professors are the most interesting to me because their research questions most closely align with mine and the work that they're doing, and I guess their style, like the way that they write their papers, I like them a lot. So those are the two that I would like to work with if I can.
And what is your general research question that you think at this point that you were interested in?
Um, I'm interested in visual perception, but specifically how structure is mentally modeled. For example, I think that I like a lot of the research that looks at symmetry and invariance. So, for example, are any of you familiar with insight problems? Like, if somebody there's a classic example of someone gives you 6 matchsticks and says, I want you to give me 4 triangles. Well, when you try to do this in 2 dimensions, it's impossible. And the interesting thing is with the visual system is that we see all of our retinal images are in 2 dimensions. But from an infinite number of mental models in 3 dimensions, we choose the optimal one. And so to solve this problem, we do this every day without thinking of it. Now, to solve this problem I gave you of the matchsticks, is one needs to do is change their mental representation from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions. If you turn the matchsticks into a pyramid, you get all 4 sides. And so I throw this little anecdote out there because I'm very interested in how structure is mentally represented and how you model that mathematically. And that's the direction that I'm interested in, is visual perceptual tasks and looking at symmetry and mental models and invariances and how we can choose the models that most closely approximate what's going on in the mind. I know, not the most, I don't think most people going into psychology see themselves ending up in that area, but it's the exciting thing for all of you is it's such a broad field. So, I mean, there's so many different things, and you could find something that really, really interests you. And it could be as remote as what I'm telling you I'm interested in.
You guys do like computer modeling with the mental, like visual perception and all that? I mean, visual perceptions, do you guys use computers often to like generate models?
Yes. So we do that. And there's some really good work if you're interested in this and you like Gestalt psychology. There is a professor called Zagamut Pislow. Dr. Pislow here does a lot of work with creating mental models that approximate how humans think and solve problems specifically. And the paper that I wrote, and you can look it up, or I could share it in the chat. Actually, we programmed the experimental paradigm was programmed in Python.
I think you guys like model a expected 3D model versus the actual? Like, how do you guys measure like the actual expectancy? Like, how do you expect the brain to work?
Well, if I had that answer, I, I, how do I, trying to think of how to pose this. So there's something called forward problems and inverse problems. And forward problems are much like what you might get in, say, like a math class, right? Is you're asked to compute the distance between 2 points, right? And so you're given these 2 points, and then you're asked to calculate the distance. And we have a formula for this, right? But what if I gave you the distances or the pairwise distances, but didn't give you the points? And so this is an inverse problem. And so when we talk about models, is we're inferring models from the data, which is really difficult to do, right? Because you create these models and they can approximate human behavior, but there's not a singular answer when you're talking about like a forward problem. And if that's maybe a little vague, it's difficult to answer. Nobody has that answer, but we kind of look at different models that do approximate human behavior in certain ways. But there is no one model. Nobody's really figured it out and said, this is how humans think in all cases. That's maybe research that you could work on when you get to graduate school.
Not at the moment, no. Maybe like later I read more about it, I'll have better terminology to describe it, because like right now, I'm kind of learning information, so it feels kind of like,
Yeah, I just think it's interesting that, you know, that this is the kind of stuff you're doing in a psychology program. It's like back when I was in school, this would have definitely been the neuroscience aspect, right? It would have been like in computational modeling, computational. Yeah, that was all part of it, like, that was part of my neuroscience program. There's
Yeah,
one facet of it.
and it's very broad. And just to kind of give you like a little like history is what I've discovered was there was this break. You've probably all by now heard of Freud or Carl Jung, right? As you start doing your introductory psychology programs, you look at this, you talk a lot about them, but there's this separation between the Gestalt psychologists who were more interested in modeling behavior. So like I'll give you a classic study was, have any of you heard of Color's study with the bananas, where he hung the bananas and then he put crates or boxes in a pen with chimpanzees, and then the chimpanzees stacked the boxes to get to the bananas? Is this study familiar with anybody from a textbook?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Okay, so when you talk about cognitive psychology, what you're really talking about is not that chimpanzees were able to stack boxes and get bananas, but that no law of physics is violated here. But you have to have a mental model. It wasn't eating the banana that caused the chimp to stack the boxes. It was a mental model that they used to get to the bananas to eat them. And so that's when we talk about mental models as human beings. And in the cognitive psychology areas, you're really looking at this is unique to humans, right? And we try to approximate it with AI. So cognitive science and AI kind of they've separated, but they're kind of closely related in some ways, because you're trying to say, like, how do we approximate how you represent structure in your mind? Like, because you can't have goal-directed behavior without a mental model, an effective one. And so that's more where I've gone into, as opposed to like, behavioral, like why do humans behave a certain way, or Milgram experiments and or the stuff you hear in abnormal psychology, which is all great and interesting. But yeah, so we do that stuff. And then kind of to go back on the fMRI stuff, have most of you taken Dr. Ferguson's biopsychology class? So you're familiar with action potentials then, right? So you actually, that when you were talking, somebody had asked about models, that is a model. That's a model that approximates how neurons work, right? And there's a similar approximation that we use called the sigmoid or logistics function in neural networks. And we try to approximate what this neuron would be doing with a mathematical model.
so like, do mental models cause us to be goal orientated, or is like our goal orientation causing mental models? Like, are people born with mental models? Is like an inherent thing, or inherent?
Well, there is I'm trying to think of his name. It's, oh my gosh, it escapes me right now. It'll come back to me. But there was an early cognitive psychologist, and there was a test that they performed. He performed that when a child is born, you snap your fingers and the infant turns its head towards the sound. Now, this is a nativist viewpoint that says that, okay, there's some coordination between the visual and motor systems and auditory system that you're prepackaged with. And so you have this sensory information, and you solve this sensory input through transduction, which is a process I'm not going to get into. But one might argue that there are certain mental models that we're programmed with, right, as human beings. But abstract thought, that's something that's unique to human beings and that happens over the course of development. And I don't have enough information to be an authority on it. But when you're sitting at home, just kind of think about it, right? Like, just kind of think about, like, before you engage in any goal-directed behavior, whether it be I'm going to make myself coffee or I'm trying to get into to transfer into college, you are developing a mental model. And if that mental model is effective, then your goal will be achieved. So again, I didn't answer your question directly, but I think that that's something that makes us really uniquely human, is this abstract ability to have abstract thought and to think many, many steps ahead.
I think the question, I think the probably can't answer is because like, we don't know the answer, right? Which comes first. But I think, like, way I would say is it's probably, what you said is like, we are born with certain things that, that are hardwired in, and then our experiences help us build on that, and because of our social interactions, we have different experiences than other animals, and so that helps us develop that abstract thinking.
Yes. I think I have a kind of a good example for this is like, and like if someone told you to pick an object in the room and to look at it and find the center of the object, we can, provided there's no impairments to your vision or like some sort of pathology, you can do this, right? And humans do it very, very well, and they do it without thinking. And what your mind is doing is it's actually using, what we would think of as formulas if a professor was asking you to solve this problem, find the centroid of this object. But we do it seamlessly. But the interesting part with the visual system is you don't have access to it. And when you talk about explicit or implicit processes, is I can ask you and you could find the center of this object, but when asked to tell someone how you did it, you don't have access to that information. So I think it's fascinating that some of this stuff, when I say we're prepackaged to it or prepackaged with it, we have this ability. There's very little individual difference across people. And then some stuff, there's a lot of individual difference, and you can declare what that model is. But yes, we don't really know, like I don't think anybody has that information of how all the mental models work.
Why we keep doing research.
Yep.
I guess I would say thank you very much for your time. I know we appreciate it. And it was
Good.
to hear your story and all those things. And I wish you the best of luck in your graduate applications.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me. And any of the students, if you have questions or they come up or you want to ask Dr. Ferguson or you want resources here at UCI and you're transferring, if I can help in any way, please let me know.